Good day. Seeing as how it is October, I feel I might as well do something that is at least somewhat Halloween related. Well, alright, let's face it, you already saw the title. Today we're going to take a look at Batman vs. Dracula, Red Rain. But before we do that, I want to complain about horror films. I do not like the horror genre at all. Although I do have a soft spot for the films made by Universal in the 1930s and the Hammer films from the 50s to 70s. But really, everything else, I just don't like. Think about this a moment. Old Frank, Wolf, and Drac all had very small body counts. Moreover, they never really had to face a concentrated resistance until the end of the film. And when they did, they were always vanquished, although they seemed to survive no matter what. You gotta remember Dracula, he got killed by an old man. Also, the Wolfman got killed by an old man as well. The big problem with monsters is they could take down anything. The modern incarnation of the Wolfman was essentially nothing more than a shaggy, incredible Hulk. I'm gonna ask, is this really what we face from wolves? What really causes me great annoyance are the modern monsters, so to speak. Jason, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and all the rest are all quite annoying. They have massive body counts only because they are going up against cretins with little more intelligence than ambulatory ashtrays. For me, the best monster film that has come out recently has got to be Van Helsing. First off, you have Wolverine as the title character, minus the claws of course. Basically, he goes around killing monsters in increasingly awesome ways. For example, the final battle is a giant werewolf versus a giant bat monster. Really, for me, this is a monster movie at its best. Competent characters fighting against more or less competent villains. I have no doubt in my mind that I could take out Jason Voorhees, Mike Myers, and let Scream, Dunkoff, all at the same time with one hand tied behind my back. Now we all know that Batman is able to handle just about any threat up to and including Mr. Mixelpick. But what about vamps? Well, DC Comics number 32 answers that question. They, of course, stand not a single chance against Batman's might. In this comic, Batty has to face off against one of his earliest villains, the Monk, who is actually able to put him under some kind of mind control, which holds Batty for about 5 minutes. After he breaks free of it, he uses gas pellets to kill a number of werewolves. Then, he uses a silver statue to make some bullets for the Batgun, and then proceeds to eliminate all the vamps in the general vicinity. So now you know that Batman can handle himself against vampires. So how does Dracula fare against the watchful Guardian? Well, let's crack open Batty Drac Red Rain and see how the Dark Knight strikes this time. The cover can be taken several ways. One, it can be taken symbolically, and if taken that way, it is very effective. It's Batman rising from the grave to fight crime and the forces of evil once more. But taken another way, the way I look at it, that is, it looks pretty hilarious. The way his hand is open and his overall posture conjures up the image that he's waving at his adoring fans going, "Woo! I'm back, baby!" Really, the cover is effective on some levels, but when you first see it, and if you're in the right mood, it's going to look pretty hilarious, to say the least. Also, the title is somewhat misleading. It's Batman and Dracula. I keep calling it Batman vs. Dracula because it is. I mean, if it was Batman and Dracula, you would think that Batman and Dracula would team up to fight some greater monster. But they don't. They fight each other, so therefore you would think it would be Batman versus Dracula. So with that misleading title out of the way, let's open up Batman versus Dracula and take a look. The story proper opens with Drac snacking on a random prostitute. There is something funny here though, and that's the fact that this version of Drac is the ultra-arrogant one, with him saying, "I don't give, I take." After that, we see something that will recur throughout the comic. Batman being jerked out of a sound sleep. These dreamlike sequences will play a larger role later in the story. Eventually, we get to see this version of the Batmobile, and it's not very good. First off, his cape is about 40 feet long and will probably get caught on everything. But to make matters worse, this Batmobile doesn't even have a roof! What's he gonna do if it rains or snows or anything? Also, the Batmobile looks fairly idiotic. It just seems like a joke almost. And it is far from menacing. And I would imagine it's also far from useful. It's almost like it's the Bat Clown Car. And here is Batman himself. And I have to say, I must laugh derisively at him for a moment. Why is Batman so bloody pointed? Look at him. He's as skinny as a stick. He's like Stickman. Look at his hands. Look how tiny they are. The overall design of this Batman is just stupid. It makes me think of like one of those hot dog costumes that's supposed to look like the Batsuit. Betty, I'm sorry to bother you and all, but really, what were you thinking?
Look, I was going through a phase, alright? I don't want to talk about it.
The story kind of opens fairly slow. Batman just finds a body and not much else, but it picks up when the mayor and Commissioner Gordon talk about a number of murders. So far, there have been 19 throat slashings attributed to an unknown assailant. It is, of course, the work of Dracula, and several other vampires as well. With Jaws styling, the mayor wants to keep it quiet so that the general populace does not get panicky. Later, we cut to Batman trying to figure out just what is going on, and one will be quick to notice that he is always grimacing, or making a suitably goofy face. And also, Batman is in full internal monologue mode. Here's a good example.
And this night is special, a pungent darkness of thrilling wind.
You know, after reading this comic, I think I've come to the conclusion that this is Emo Man. Everything he does in this comic has an emo feel to it, so to speak. From his incessant monologue to his cadaverous frame. Eventually, Betty fights a vampire, and it's fairly decent looking, meaning you actually get to see in exquisite detail Batman getting his ass handed to him. He gets a few good hits here and there, but he really doesn't do all that much damage. But, as a plus, the vampire does run away. So actually, even though Batman's been roughed up a bit, his pride is still intact. The next day, Bruce Wayne wakes up only to find that he has super strength, and he finds this out in a very, very expensive way. He breaks the door handle off of his Mercedes. Yeah, wonder how much that had to have cost him. Had to have been a couple thousand at least.
We had to fire Robin to pay for the damage.
Oh, so that's a plus then. After discovering he has super strength, he first, off panel of course, goes to Metropolis and uses it to show up Superman by fighting Donkey Kong, of all villains, and saving Lois Lane. Upon completing that task, Batman returns to Gotham to have his blood examined, because he believes he might actually be a vampire. The doctor he goes to has rather odd equipment. Just look at that microscope. This is emo Batman, not steampunk Batman. With his doctor's appointment at an end, Batman seeks out someone with knowledge of vampire lore. Essentially, all we get here is pointy Batman and a regurgitation of everything we already know about vampires. Although we do get a pretty cool Batman cloak.
Let's just say, to me, all criminals are vampires, cloaked in the night to prey on the innocent.
Although when he says this, he is in kind of a stupid pose that ruins it just a bit. Well, after narrating to himself a bit more, Batty decides to face the vampire horde dead on. Damn. Alright, I retract the dead and instead replace it with head. Batman is so badass that he's actually able to fight an entire army of vampires with nothing more than his fists. Or better yet, if you remember from NES Batman, it's just the Batman. Unfortunately,
Batman is overwhelmed by sheer numbers and is almost defeated. But lucky for him, an army of vampire hunters show up and take down the horde. The vampire hunters themselves are actually vampires, only they are good vampires. The leader of the group, Tanya, begins to explain what's going on, only to be waylaid by Dracula, who uses his prodigious mental powers to try and force the vampire hunters to kill themselves. Betty, of course, is not affected in the slightest by Drac's mind powers and attacks him in a very strange way. Let's look at this here. Batman is clearly standing in front of Dracula, but here he is clearly attacking Drac from behind. And then, somehow, he triggers this sewage pipe.
No hero should ever go without a continuity changer. Although, seeing as how it's Batman, I'm pretty sure it's a continuity changing spray rather than just a solid device.
And then, the awesome meter is broken forever. Batman is able to ward off Dracula by drawing a cross on a wall with his own blood.
Yeah, enough said. Really, there's absolutely nothing I can add to a blood cross.
Later we learn that Batman's earlier dreams were actually real events. You see, Tanya is the leader of the vampire resistance, and she was attempting to give Batman various vampire powers so he could stop Dracula before he's able to take over the world.
Now I know that a lot of you are probably wondering why she didn't just go to Old Soups, or Green Lantern, or Martian Manhunter, or any of the others. Why? Well, for one, they don't exist in this universe. And for another, sure, Superman could potentially throw Dracula into the sun, but would he really have done it? You see, Superman is just too much of a Boy Scout, so to speak. Now, here's the thing. Being a Boy Scout isn't bad, but really, modern Superman is just kind of wimpy in many respects. He has all this great strength, but he's always afraid to use it. And he just doesn't really have the stomach to do what needs to be done most of the time. And when he does, he usually turns evil, like Communist Superman, who basically just takes over the entire world, and if you don't follow what he says, he turns you into a Superman robot. You get the idea. Superman versus Dracula just would not be as good. It really takes a hero like Batman to be able to walk up to the edge of the abyss and not fall in. And also, he doesn't blink either.
After Batty learns that he is becoming a vampire, he and Tanya go to warn Commissioner Gordon, and something really stupid happens. You see, Gordon does not believe in the whole vampire thing, so Tanya decides to get Gordon to shoot at her. He does, and she has this to say: "Not even 1,000 bullets could stop me." Here is the problem. We clearly see blood splatters, meaning that the bullets did go in.
Alright, for one, that statement makes absolutely no sense. Now, it does make sense that a vampire could shrug off a couple of pistol rounds. But think about this a moment. We saw earlier vampires getting pierced with wooden stakes that had to have been fired by compressed air. And a bullet's going to be going a lot faster than a wooden stake. And essentially all that wooden stake is doing is destroying the heart. Maybe it has some magic properties to it. But think about this. We already know that vampires are affected by kinetic energy. So if you were to shoot a vampire in the head with a 50 BMG round, that head's coming off. And we all know that vampires can't be killed by decapitation, so apparently the 1,000 bullets, well, that's going to knock one down anyway just by kinetic energy alone. Really, in media, it always seems that guns just aren't really as powerful as they really are. So in all reality, guns would take down a vampire. It just depends on where you put the shot. And also, how big the bullet's going to be.